At 22, she was told she had 3 years to live and given a 35% chance of survival. But instead of giving up, Suleika Jaouad picked up a pen and began to write her way back to life. Today, she's here to share a simple and transformative practice that can alchemize pain into power. It can turn confusion into creativity and your story into something that saves you. You know, if you've ever felt super stuck or lost or like you're living in the in-between, this conversation could change it all. So I just need to hold this up. This is my advanced reader edition, but by the time you all will be seeing this, it will be out, and you need to get yourself a copy or 5 for yourself and the people that you love, because it is so gorgeous and so powerful. And this practice, writing and journaling, and just, we have so much. Okay. So for those who don't know your story, let's take it back. So there's the larger context of that summer when you were 22 and everything changed.
So if it's cool with you, I'm going to take it back just
wherever
a few more
you
beats.
want. Yes.
So I was born here in New York City in the East Village to 2 immigrant parents. And I think, like a lot of first-gen kids, I had this self-imposed pressure to honor the sacrifices my parents had made for me. And my version of what that looked like pre-age 22 was, I was just someone who was constantly on the go. I was on a hamster wheel. I defined my sense of self-worth by my productivity, and I had my 1-year plan and my 5-year plan and my 10-year plan, and I was just all about my ambition. And when I graduated in 2010, I had all kinds of questions about the future, as one does when you're in your early 20s, and all kinds of dreams and ambitions. But I think, you know, when you're that age, there's this sense of endless time to figure out who you are and what you want to do, and to plot the distance between where you are presently and where you hope to end up. And almost exactly a year after graduating from college, I got diagnosed with an aggressive form of leukemia. And that sense of endless time and all of those plans pretty much imploded within, you know, the amount of time it took to utter my diagnosis. And I found myself back home in my childhood bedroom with its embarrassing pink walls and boy band posters shuttling between there and the hospital. And I spent the next 4 years in and out of the hospital undergoing treatment. But more than a crash course in illness, I think that experience for me was a major wake-up call in terms of what I prioritized. The journalist David Brooks makes the distinction between our resume virtues, which are the things that make us attractive in the modern marketplace, and our eulogy virtues, which are, you know, the traits and qualities that were lauded for often long after we're gone. Were we kind? Were we brave? Were we loyal? Were we humble? And as much as, you know, those values were things that were important to me, they weren't necessarily the kind of guiding North Star of how I was making my decisions and where I was investing my time.
Let's talk about the notion of a 100-day project, which was originated by the Yale professor, Michael Beirut, is it? Where you perform one creative act for 100 days. And this was so lovely to me because I feel like I love containers. Like I need containers. Otherwise, you know, what you were describing as the child of immigrants, it's like productivity and your value being tied, at least mine, in my own experience, to output and production and achievement. And so that can go wild if I don't have a container. And so something like 100 days, it's like, oh, wait, that's ambitious and achievable. Mm-hmm. Tell me about what that first experience of a 100-day project was for you, and what was the impact?
So, you know, even after my diagnosis, I had this sense that I had to make something useful out of this experience, because that's just the way that my brain works. And so I entered the hospital and ended up spending about 8 weeks in the hospital. And when I first got admitted, I brought with me this suitcase packed full of books. And I told my dad, my professor dad, that I was going to use that time in the hospital to read through the rest of the Western canon, which is just totally absurd to me now. And of course, I did not read through the rest of the Western canon. I didn't read a single one of those books in my suitcase, and instead spent that summer feeling really depressed and angry and scared and attempting to set the world record for the number of Grey's Anatomy episodes binged consecutively. That's what I was doing with my time. And so, you know, my friends and family were worried, and they were looking for something that we could do that could anchor our days around something other than just the next biopsy results or the next day's news. And this friend, you know, introduced us to the idea of a 100-day project. And everyone was so excited, because it was not only a thing that we could do individually, but it was something we could do in community. I was not excited. And you know, my normal life before cancer would have been excited by a project like this for the very reasons you described. But I, at that point in my life, felt like I wasn't sure I was going to be well enough to do it. I did not feel inspired. I didn't need any more reasons to feel bad about myself. And, you know, as much as I had always loved journaling, which was what immediately came to mind as my 100-day project, was also, you know, the person, I think, like a lot of us, who buys a beautiful new journal with the best of intentions of filling it out, and I'll write in the first couple of pages and then leave the rest blank. And then, of course, have to buy another journal because you have to start again
kind of
fresh.
Ruined.
That one's ruined.
That was ruined for life, totally.
It contains evidence of your failure. But, you know, I think to me, you know, there's always been something really eye-opening about being in despair, because there's also a kind of clarity that comes with it. It just strips away all of the bullshit.
Yes.
And as much as I didn't feel motivated, I knew that I needed to find something that I could do within these new limitations, however frustrating they were. And so I decided to go ahead, and in order to kind of lower the barrier to entry, I made a couple of rules for myself. One was that I would aim for 3 pages, but that any amount would do. If it was a paragraph, fine. If it was a sentence, if it was one word, occasionally the F word, like that was great too. And there was no wrong way to do it. And so there really wasn't an excuse for me to fall off after 1 or 2 days. And the other rule I made was that I wasn't going to reread any of my entries, because I didn't want to bring that sort of censor's voice to the work. And I needed the journaling to feel as welcoming as possible. It wasn't grammatical writing. It wasn't, I'm penning a masterpiece writing. It could be lists. It could be sentence fragments. It didn't matter. And so that's what I did.
So I'm curious, was the communal aspect of it something that you grew up with your family? Like, I think that's such a beautiful thing. And I've been thinking a lot about family because I'm going through a lot of struggles with my own right now. And I think that just the notion, you know, that your folks and the other people around you were like, hey, this is something we can do together. That's something super foreign to me. And I'm curious if that was a part of your upbringing, or if that was something that emerged that felt organic to that moment in time.
You know, I have a tight-knit family, and there were things that we did together, like dinner was mandatory every night, but we never really did group activities. And I think that's the interesting thing about having this ceiling cave in on you is, you know, it's that cliche that we need a village. And until you really need a village, it's hard to understand that it's a cliche because it's true.
Yes.
And so that summer, as much as we were there for one another, it's hard to talk about scary prognoses. I think we were all trying to protect each other and to put on a brave face for one another. And we're not a family who cries. I grew up in a pull yourself up by the bootstraps and, have thick skin and, be as brave as you can and keep moving. And as great as that is, I also think inadvertently, we were more isolated because of it. We weren't sharing in our fears. We weren't sharing in our sadness. We were carrying that privately. And so I think that 100-day project was as much about finding a thing we could each do as it was about feeling connected to one another.
That's beautiful.
And that was really ultimately what made me to decide to do it.
So you also wrote in the lost year after treatment that you stopped journaling for a bit. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was so interesting. And then you fast forwarded through time and you dove back in with morning pages, which morning pages have been a godsend to me. And one of the things that I read in this book that was really similar between you and I is you had reflected that after a while you started to find yourself in certain loops. And I've had that question. That's why I was so excited and I'm so inspired by your book, because I've seen in my own morning pages, I'm like, this shit is sounding familiar. I was like, girl, you know what I mean? I was like,
totally.
are we really going here again? Even if it's not necessarily emotional stuff, my just observing, and I guess there's value in that in and of itself, but how my mind is wired around the lists and around the to-dos and around the next things. And I was like, and you had reflected, you mentioned you were bored of the sound of your own voice. I cannot tell you how many morning page journals I have. I'm like, girl, I am. So I just want to talk about that for a minute, because we've had Julia Cameron on the show and I love her. And I'm always I'm bowled over at, I'm like, dude, another book. And I bow to it and bow to it. So I love that it's like, oh my gosh, this is our starting point. And then just having the self-awareness to be like, okay, amazing. I've got the engines going, and maybe there's this other piece. And you write about, you found a new way to kind of add into that. So let's just talk about that for a little bit, because it's so cool.
So, and I also am a huge Julia Cameron fan, love morning pages. And I was doing my 3 pages a day. I was so lost. I had just emerged from these 4 years of treatment. I was lost professionally. I was lost spiritually. I was lost in any way a person can be lost. And I had gone through this terrible, terrible heartbreak. And so I was doing my morning pages, and all of my morning pages were contained the same elements, especially long, exhaustive rants about my ex. And I was like, come on, it's time to move on. I don't want to be rehashing the same old grievances. I want to be moving forward. But sometimes when you're stuck in your life, it's easy to get stuck in the same thought loops. And so I felt this urge to be prompted. And I'm not someone who I think would have responded positively to the idea of a journaling prompt or a writing prompt. I would have been like, absolutely not. This feels like homework.
Yes.
And so what I started doing was reading the journals and diaries of women I admired. I was reading Susan Sontag. I was reading Virginia Woolf and Frida Kahlo. And there was just something about reading a short little excerpt of something that felt kind of kaleidoscopic. It just twisted the barrel and the light fell differently. And so that became my new practice. That combined with the 100-day project, because I think the other challenge for me is as you put it, I love a container. Yeah. I love to be able to tally things up or cross something off a calendar. And I need to feel like there is an end date that I'm working towards. And so I combined those two elements of the 100-day project and the reading something or being prompted in some kind of way, and began to find that either, in my reading, I would feel a flash of recognition and that would spur something. Or sometimes I would read something and be completely put off or even annoyed or enraged by it. And that was interesting, information too.
Yes.
But whichever way, I was being prompted toward a new train of thought, toward a new portal into my intuition.
I found it fascinating too. I forget who said it, but someone had said it's like sticking a finger in a goldfish bowl, like a prompt. And I had that similar reaction where it's like, write about, a time and so-and-so. And I feel my inner no, or I don't have anything. Or totally. I think you were saying it's just for me, it's like a blinking cursor. I'm like, I got nothing.
Absolutely.
I feel so blocked and put on the spot, but I do love this notion of reading a short passage or a short essay and just being able, for me, sometimes it's almost like getting an energetic alignment with that person's creativity or soul or perspective that unlocks something in me that I just didn't have access to before. So it's like, this is so fun.
Yeah, you're in dialogue.
Yes.
Not just with the self, but, with other creative beings.
Yes. So let's go to 2020 and the lockdown. And I thought this was so fun, like the Downward Dog creative download with Carmen.
Oh my goodness.
And I was curious, before you explain what that means, I was curious for you if movement or music opens up your channel. Like in my world, I've talked about this a lot. All the time, if it's a workout class, if it's a dance class, if I am some type of physical movement seems to be the magical key that unlocks downloads.
Absolutely.
And they come and depending on dance class, it's so funny. I'm always like, remember this. Cause I'm like, I don't, you know what I mean? I'm like, there's no pen or paper around. It's like, girl, stick it in your head.
Yeah.
Does that happen for you?
That happens for me. Showers, walking, dancing, and honestly, journaling with paper and pen, which
yes.
May not seem like a lot of movement, but just not doing the stationary thing of typing on your computer, but actually, feeling the paper under your palm, feeling the scratch, listening to the scratch of the pen, anything that gets me out of my cerebral mind and into my body is where I start to unlock interesting things.
So you're with Carmen. You guys are Carmen. Upstate.
Yes. Like a lot of people, I had some surprise quarantine pod roommates. My now husband, John, my brother was quarantining with us, and my friend Carmen, who was supposed to be visiting for a few days and ended up staying for 3 months. And we were doing some downward dogs. I was on book deadline, extremely stressed out, finishing grad school. And our mutual friend, Liz G, describes the ill-timed apparition of an idea as a mistress doing the dance of the seven veils. And that's truly what this felt like, because mid-downward dog, I turned to Carmen and I said, I have an idea. So much of this experience of quarantining feels familiar to me as someone who was in medical isolation, who had to wear masks, who lived with that sense of hypervigilance. And what if I took this idea of the 100-day project and my own approach to journaling and made them accessible to my friends and family and whomever else is interested in joining? And she was like, go write that idea down before you forget. And I was like, okay, cool. But I do not have time to do this. And fast forward 48 hours, I started this community creativity project called the Isolation Journals.
Did you go straight to Substack?
I did not go straight to Substack. Okay. I wish I had. I was on a different newsletter platform, so it was delivered in newsletter form. But the only way I've ever been able to get myself to do anything is when I back myself into a corner.
Yes.
So the reason I started this is because I wrote to someone I admired tremendously but didn't know well, which was in fact Liz G, Elizabeth Gilbert, and said, hey, we've met once. You likely don't remember me, which she did not. And I said, here's what I'm thinking of doing. And would you be interested in writing a short essay and a journaling prompt? And she responded and was like, absolutely. I'll have it to you later today. And then I was like, oh crap, I actually have to do this and figure out how to make it happen. And so that's what we ended up doing. It was a 100-day project with a different essay and prompt from, a writer or artist or unsung hero or community leader. And I'll get back to the Substack thing in a second. Within 24 hours, we had over 40,000 people signed up.
Suleika,
which is great, except that on this other newsletter platform, I was being charged per subscribers.
Yes, ma'am.
And I had a really tough financial year.
Yes.
I'd just gotten my stimulus check, and I was terrified as I was watching all these subscribers come in because I was also watching the cost of this newsletter plan increase exponentially to the point that I was like, please stop subscribing. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. So that's how it started.
That's amazing. That's such an amazing story, especially for our audience. We have so many beautiful creatives of every stripe and size and type and color and age. And most of us are, building some kind of audience or community. So it's actually pretty hilarious that you're like, no, stop. But it grew really fast. I mean, in the book, you were remarking how it was like, it went from 0 to a good, quite tens and tens and tens of thousands.
Yeah.
And so with that, this is just me from a creative standpoint being super curious. So it was a 100-day project. Did you feel like, OMG, so you got Liz, and then were you just emailing out like crazy or did you say, hey, the next installment will be next week, or the next, how did you do it logistically? Or you were just like, bleh.
So it was 100 days. I sent out a newsletter every single day, which I would not recommend.
Yes. Damn girl. Okay. That's why I'm asking these questions, because I was like, okay.
With a new contributor and prompt every single day. And, because this came together in 48 hours, I was, in fact, emailing every single person I knew. And luckily, lots of people were looking for things to do in the early days of the pandemic, but it was coming together, in the wee hours every single day. But it was also so exciting. And, my dear friend Carmen was there. And so from day one, I was like, I need help. I don't know what I'm doing. It felt like we were in this car hurtling down the road and like putting the tires on as we were flying down the road. And I know you've had moments like this, and anyone who's had a wild, harebrained idea that you somehow find yourself doing and wrangling has had this experience where I didn't know what I was doing.
Yes.
I felt like I had my own crash B school because I never, as a writer, I spent a lot of time alone with my journal or my laptop. I never had a team. I never built something like this. I'd never answered customer service emails that for us amounted to like these very lovely older people essentially saying, how do I use the internet?
Yes.
Where do I comment? Like, I'd never done any of these things.
Yes.
And as overwhelming as it was so thrilling. And I think, what made it so thrilling is that journaling is a private practice. It's something you do in the privacy of the notebook. But I think when you tap into that deeply vulnerable space, it creates a reverberation. And so to my great surprise, people began sharing their entries with each other. And we heard from so many people who were new to journaling, who were finding new meaning in it, but who were also kind of exploding the old-fashioned idea of what journaling is with pen and paper. So I had one young woman who would respond to the prompts every day with a video diary of her doing a different modern dance. Another young guy was writing song lyrics and sending out videos of him playing the guitar. We had this woman named Joelle who had lost her 13-year-old daughter and who decided that for her 100-day journaling project, she was going to use her daughter's old art supplies to create a visual diary entry every day. And that grief was so raw for her, but the way she described it was that she felt like she was in collaboration with her daughter, and that in a way it had become a grief journal, but not just about the sadness of losing your child, which is as unthinkable of a tragedy as it gets. But it was also allowing her to experience the joy of remembering her. And so I was so moved by the way in which this act of journaling that I've done for myself for so long now was helping this community transform that sense of isolation into a sense of, creative solitude and community.
I want to highlight something that you shared and you experienced that I feel like for all of us is such a good thing to remember, is like not knowing what the hell you're doing is awesome.
It's amazing.
Like the act of like not knowing what the hell you're doing just allows you to be like, let's do this, let's go. And I think there is a lot of, not only a lot of joy, but a lot of speed and magic that comes from just going fast.
Totally.
You know what I mean? And like making it happen and not overthinking. I know, at least in my own mind, the overthinking that can slow me down. And the thinking through like, well, what if this happens? Or this one wants this? And it's just like, when you just go, none of that exists.
And you not only have to be porous in the sense that you're, observing what's happening and reacting to it in real time and growing as you go. But, one thing I think about a lot in terms of entrepreneurship is you can spend a decade coming up with the most beautiful, detailed business plan in the world. But that essential question of, is this something that's actually wanted or needed, is not something you really know until you take the leap. So
yes.
The advantage of going fast was I was getting real-time feedback, and that was informing the next step. And so it really felt like I was actively building this thing day by day. And it was so fun and so dynamic. And I felt like I learned so much, not just from this community, but about what it takes to launch something like this and to sustain it.
And once the 100 days were done, was that when you kind of shifted to a new cadence? Because I know you have your Substack, which is gorgeous, by the way. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Or were you like, okay, 100 days are done, now what? Like, how did that transition go for you?
So this really, I never went into this thinking about how to monetize the newsletter or anything like that. However, by the end of the 100 days, I had over 80,000 subscribers. So think back to what I was saying about the cost of my newsletter plan.
Yes.
So I was really in a state of financial panic, even though I was having this majorly exciting success.
Yes.
And I knew that given how vulnerable this community had been and was continuing to be, it felt so weird to bring in some kind of sponsor or ad or whatever. And so I was trying to figure out a sustainable model to be able to continue this, not with a daily email, because nobody wants to receive a daily email from anybody, but on a weekly basis. And I wanted that weekly newsletter and contributor essay and prompt to be free. And that was very clear to me from day one that I wanted it to be as accessible as possible. And also because of the enormous amount of work that went into it, I needed a team. I needed help. I needed support. And obviously needed to compensate that team. And so we made the shift to Substack as a way to both honor the initial intention of the project, and also to have a model where this could be a reader-supported publication.
Absolutely.
And so that's what we've done. And we just celebrated 5 years of the Isolation Journal as it continues to grow and grow. And I say to Carmen, who's actually staying with me right now, I said, like, sometimes this feels like our baby, but also like a bit of a monster. Like, what happened? It just took over our lives, but in the most glorious way.
I love that. I love that so much. And like, it's anyone who creates anything, it's like there's this beautiful balance that we need to find and dance with and continue to find with, because it takes so much to do most things. And the work, I know sometimes folks will be like, oh, wow, it looks so easy. I'm like, oh no. You know what I mean? Like, please, like, I don't have the camera on all the time just because I can't handle it. I just like being in my sweats all the time. But I'm like, it takes a tremendous amount of work to put things together, and anything on the outside that looks, at least in my experience, that looks somewhat easeful or simple, I'm like, there's so much happening behind the scenes. So
totally.
And I love the model. Liz with Letters from Love, and I don't have too much experience on Substack besides just being able to engage with people's work. But I love it. I love it that it feels little to me. I was talking to Liz about this, kind of like the old days of the internet, when it was like Blogtown USA, and it was so precious and fun and intimate. And so, yeah, I just think it's awesome.
Well, and I think, to your point, in some ways, the easier it looks, often the more work goes into the ease. But yeah, you're so right. It does feel, the newsletter is one of the oldest written forms from the time of the Romans.
Yes.
And so there is something, especially as like a 90s Y2K kid who loved LiveJournal, who loved all of those things. Like, there's something so fun about it and scrappy that I really enjoy.
A little nostalgic too.
Totally.
So one of the best things I think for me about morning pages and journaling in general has been just this opportunity, especially when I am caught in those loops, to just re-examine narratives that I've had for a long time, and if I start to get some distance from them, and it helps me warm up to new possibilities. Like, one of my favorite inner prompts that I wrote about in my book, and I just often use a lot because it has a way of helping me open my aperture to new possibilities, is, wouldn't it be cool if ... Wouldn't it be cool if? And I can kind of take that in any area, in any facet of my existence that feels like it's gotten a little dusty and needs a shakeup. And doing that journaling always helps me. Like, I need to thaw to new possibilities often because I can get so entrenched in my ways and my habits. Is it that way for you? Like, when you journal, do you start to kind of venture into new possibilities? And if so, is there any examples of, like, let's say a story that perhaps was entrenched for you, but that through journaling, you were like, I can stop telling myself that story, and found yourself more freedom?
Yes. Well, so I have a couple of different prompts that I go back to again and again. The first that's in the book is the to feel list, because I love a to-do list. And often I'll find that I almost have to start. I often feel tempted to start with my to-do list because then I can get to the fun stuff.
Yes.
And so instead, I really try to start with a to feel list where I write down what I want to feel that day and different ideas for how to get myself there. So if I want to be present, what is it that gets me to being present? If I want to have fun and to feel, whatever it is, joy, what is it that's going to get me there? So that I've been doing. But the prompt that I return to the most, in part because I'm having a hard time allowing myself to dream big, or to think to myself, wouldn't it be cool if, is a prompt from my dear friend Holly Jacobs that's in the book, and it's called A Day in the Life of My Dream. And the premise of the prompt is that you are supposed to write about a day 5 years out, just a regular everyday from the time you wake up until you go to sleep. But the twist is that you have to write it in the first person. So I, after a decade in remission, relapsed 3 years ago, and then relapsed again this summer. And when you're living with a life-threatening disease, and certainly when you're going through the experience of finding out that you have cancer for the third time, the future becomes a scary place. As much as I've always been a dreamer, when I think even 3 or 6 months out, whatever cool idea or dream that comes to mind is very quickly followed by the fear that I won't get to exist in that future. And so that prompt, that day in the life of my dream prompt, is one that I have been doing nearly every single day since I found out about my recurrence, in part because I find dreaming to be frightening. And it feels kind of dangerous because there's, always the temptation, I think, when you're experiencing some kind of loss, that you need to guard your heart, because to open your heart is to open yourself up, not just to the possibility of new dreams and new love, but also to new loss.
Yes.
So I'll give you a very specific example. Early pandemic, my then boyfriend, John, and I had been together for a decade. And I just turned, 30, and all the big usual questions were at the doorstep. Like, what are we doing? Where is this going? And I had this feeling of like, and he had it too, like we either need to like move to the next step or move on. And there was so much doubt and so much anxiety. And I was writing about all those present doubts and anxieties. But I wasn't really doing that hard work of unguarding my heart and allowing myself to kind of dream about different versions of what a perfect everyday together or single would look like. And so I would write these entries every day. And I would start, when I woke up, and I'd look over and there John was, and it detailed this house I had, as a kid who moved a lot, always dreamed of owning my own house. And I would detail this house. I detailed the clawfoot bathtub. I detailed the old, wide plank pine floors. And it was a farmhouse, and it had 2 dogs, one of which was my current dog, and one was a dog I had yet to meet, and on and on and on. Now, not long after I started doing that prompt, I learned that my leukemia was back. And it was, this feeling like I had at 22 of my world imploding, except the difference was that when it happened, I, by that point had a clear sense of what I was looking for and what I wanted from this journaling exercise. And so when the opportunities presented themselves, whether it was, that perfect scruffy rescue pup that was dog number 2, or, my dream, farmhouse when I was in a place where I could buy my home, I was ready to leap and to take that leap and to make that commitment. And that ended up being true of my relationship as well. So many of those fears and anxieties were my own fears and anxieties that actually weren't about John. They were, my own baggage that I was bringing into it. And it was just in the process of doing that daily journaling and putting myself in that dream future place in the present tense that I was actually able to inhabit what that would feel like without, without the distraction of all my anxieties. And so I'll wrap this up by just saying that, like a lot of couples during the pandemic, we had this notion that if we got married, we were going to wait until after the pandemic so we could have a big, party. John's from New Orleans. We were going to do some kind of second line and music and dancing and good food. And when I got sick, one of the very first things John said is we should get married, which we did. We planned our wedding in 24 hours. It was in the living room of our house that we had yet to move into. We didn't have a stitch of furniture, and we got flowers and candles, and we had 3 friends and ordered takeout and had champagne. And I don't think we even had rings. We had bread twists.
Yes.
Because there wasn't time. And I was being admitted to the hospital the next day. And he said, we had a plan, and we're not going to let anything get in the way of that plan. And so that kind of defiant dreaming for me has been so needed as I'm navigating all of these new unknowns, and the place where I'm able to do that dreaming is in the journal, because nobody knows about it other than me.
Yeah.
And I have the freedom to just kind of follow a whimsy or a fantasy without worrying about where it'll lead or what the outcome might be.
You write so beautifully. These are your words. I just want to share them because it's right in this pocket. And I feel like it moved me so much. Share, the events of my life have trained me to expect the ceiling to cave in. So when I start to dream wildly and ambitiously, the voices of doubt and fear immediately chime in. But a fear-driven life is one where I stop myself from dreaming ambitiously. It means living safe and small, always hedging against the worst case scenario. I don't want that. I want to live boldly. I want to hold the best case scenario at the forefront and have that guide my decisions and actions. And so my current modus operandi must be this. I have to trust and find ways to delight in the mystery of how things unfold, even if it's not what I had planned, even if it's far from ideal. I have to believe it's possible that facing the thing you fear brings you exactly what you need. And just this notion of dancing with fear and dancing with dreaming big and making plans and the willingness to change gears when necessary. It feels so rich and necessary to have a tool like this to be able to do that, because I'm sure there are countless souls listening to this conversation right now that find themselves in their own version of, whether to use a phrase that you've shared, life interrupted, whether it's sickness or loss or some other kind of heartbreak. So that's why I'm so excited about this conversation, because you're doing this and demonstrating in real time.
I think, navigating uncertainty is something that maybe all of us have done to some extent. But right now, at this particular moment in the world, there is so much angst around uncertainty, whether it's political or global or financial or personal. And so in a way, figuring out how to swim in that ocean of uncertainty, that has been my constant work with each of these new relapses. And, when I had this most recent relapse, I said to my oncologist, I was like, I don't know what to do with myself. Like, I'm so anxious. There are all these what ifs. There are no statistics that I can look to that can give me insight into my prognosis. I just don't know how to make plans. Even with this book, I found out about my relapse when in the final week that it was due, and I had the afterword still to write. And I think, as one often does when you're finishing a book, there's this temptation to tie up the message of the book with this beautiful bow. And especially with the news of that relapse, I was like, I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me that in a way, that's what the journal embodies. There are no neat bows. It's about, reveling in the mess, and puzzling through the questions. The quote that opens the book is one of my favorite lines from the poet Rilke, and he says, live the questions now until someday you can live your way into the answers. And so that's really what I've had to do. There will always be what ifs. Yeah. And, I may live a little closer to my mortality than some people. But the one certainty that we all have is that we're not going to be here forever.
Right.
That life is a terminal condition, and that may sound wildly depressing, but there's also a kind of liberation in that. And so when I shift away from my fear of the uncertainty into the mystery of uncertainty, of all the unknowns, not just bad, but good and surprising and wild, then I get kind of excited.
Yeah.
And so, the counterintuitive thing about getting sick again is that it's given me a sense of permission to return to that creativity that we all as children just have in us innately, that we lose as we get older, as we get self-conscious, as we start to feel like there's a right and a wrong way to be. And it's given me permission to experiment and play and to not know. And there's a relief in not having to know. And as we said earlier, making it up as you go along.
It can be so exciting and so freeing. The trip that you took with the 50 of the top thinkers and luminaries of the world that you wrote about, I want to dive into that for a second and then get into a little more of about journaling, because I know some people hold themselves back, and you've got some great tools and tips that can help people crack into this. But first, so that trip that you got invited on, right? And I laughed so hard when you were talking about just folks asking you, so what do you do? Can I tell you, Suleika, that is I've always hated that question. I still hate the question to this day. Like sometimes I'm out with Josh, who's an actor. And so we're in these entertainment circles, right?
Yeah.
So like directors and, all of these.
I'm already sweating. Yes. I feel this so deeply.
It's like, and so I'm and of course they'll come, so are you an actor as well? And then I know it's coming because I am not. And then it's like, so what do you do? And I basically, like at this point, sometimes I go and sometimes I'm like, are those shrimp? Like, oh, is that guacamole? Oh my gosh, this looks so good, because I just never have one good society approved answer. So I was laughing so hard. Can you just share a little bit about your experience with that question? And then my follow-up after the story is like, you know what I've done? Like I was just at an engagement party the other night, and it was someone who knows me, like just, we're acquaintances. And she's like, oh, tell me more about your work. And I literally said, open Instagram.
I love it.
And I was just like, I was like, just experience it. So, okay, take us to that
oh God,
50 of the world's.
So I have feared this answer since I started writing. My very first writing job was a column in the New York Times called Life Interrupted that existed because of that first 100-day project. The contents of my journal became the source material and inspiration for that column. But even then, it was a column about being in my early 20s and navigating illness. And whenever people would ask me what I did, I felt kind of self-conscious about writing personal essays. So I always had this temptation to beef it up and make it sound more serious. So I'd say like, I write a column in the New York Times science section or something. And so anyway, that angst and fear and that inclination that you have to like be some exaggerated, more impressive, rigorous version of who you are is a chip that I've carried on my shoulder forever. And you would think that by now I'd be over it. But a year ago, I'm at this conference and, all these incredible speakers and then these breakout sessions. And I found myself in this conversation with like some Nobel Prize winning scientist and some other, intimidatingly impressive person. And everyone was talking about, their work doing artificial intelligence and editing genomes and whatever the else. And I knew it was coming. And they turned to me and they said, so what are you working on? And I just kind of froze because I was working on this book, this distillation of a creative practice that has not only changed my life, but I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that it has saved my life. And I said, I'm writing a book about journaling. And I just watched that answer fall so flat. And I wanted to make it more serious. I wanted to say, I'm actually, it's about the history of journaling, which it absolutely is not. But I was like, how do I make this sound more scholarly? And I felt so embarrassed. And the thing is, I there is a mountain of evidence about the benefits of journaling, from, lowering stress levels to even improving your immune system. And I know the applicabilities that it's had on my life, on every aspect of my life, from my work and my business to my relationship to just my own, growth and development of self. But I just shrunk.
Yes. And I've done it many times.
So when you feel that temptation to shrink,
yes.
And as someone who's married to someone in the entertainment world, yes. I struggle with this too. It's like Glennon Doyle talks about her fear of walking down a red carpet with her wife.
Yes.
Where, they'll take, 5 minutes of photographs of her wife, and then she steps in and they take like one or two half-hearted photos and they're like, next. But I'm curious, to quote Brene, that temptation to shrink or puff up, and the challenge of standing your sacred ground. How do you resist the urge to shrink or puff up?
Some days I'm better than others. Like some days I beeline for the shrimp. You know what I mean? Yeah, some days I don't have it in me, and other days I'm able to just talk through it. Like, do you know how, there's small business owners who just want to have more customers and maybe they don't have blah, blah, blah. And, I can go there. Yeah. And there's times when like, I'm feeling like, I don't know, maybe I had a great cup of coffee that morning and I just dive in, you know what I mean? And I'm super playful. I've never, even though I know the value of having these wonderful quote unquote lines, or, having a few things that I could say, I'm just not good at it. I'm like a much more spontaneous person. So I try and be as responsive and dance with the person as possible, but I still don't have one society approved answer. Like I remember even in the early days when I was trying to figure out the business and I was bartending and waiting tables and dancing, and I was just like feeling like such a loser because I was so multi-passionate, but I didn't have that phrase yet. And when that phrase entered my consciousness, which I believe it's from like the creative gods or God or goddess or universal consciousness, whatever magic exists beyond us, where it was like, you are a multi-passionate entrepreneur. And I was like, I am a multi-passionate entrepreneur. I didn't even know what the hell that meant. But Suleika, it gave me a new context. And then people asked me what I did, and I would say that, and they're like, well, what does that mean? I was like, well, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm teaching hip hop, and on Mondays, I'm coaching, and I kind of started to be able to run through some of the projects I was working on. But it's so funny because I was like, you were saying, guys, still, it sounds like it still has that for you. I'm like, dude, this has been 25 years now, and I still don't have a great answer.
I love what you said about not having a society approved answer, because when I think about the people I admire most, who I am most inspired by, none of them have society approved messages. You included. I mean, I have heard you talk about the notion of being a multi-passionate entrepreneur, and I relate so deeply to it because as a kid, I was someone who had so many different passions, and I felt shame about it. Yeah, right? Me too. The message from all corners, especially in the United States, is you have to find a singular purpose. Yes. You need to transform that purpose into your passion, and then you need to transform that passion into your profession. Yep. And you need to become the very best at it, and you need to monetize it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I never had a singular purpose or passion. I still don't. Yes. And I will say, in part, thanks to my journaling practice, I feel like just in the last couple of years, I've been able to accept and make space, not just within the pages of my journal, but beyond it for all of those beautiful, varied parts of myself. Yes. And I love that. Like I'm rarely on social media, but whenever I'm having an amazing guest on, I go in all the different places just to like soak up someone's energy and to be in it. And your visual art is so stunning. And like it actually really inspired me. I don't know, many of you don't know this, but like as a kid, I thought I was going to be a fine artist, a visual artist. That was my first thing. It was like, okay, is it a fashion designer? Is it just fine art? Is it animator for Disney? So it was really, really beautiful. Like I saw the work, it was on John's
piano, right? It was just like, oh girl, your work is, I can't wait to see more of it, of your visual work, because it's so, so, so stunning.
Well, and it's a totally new thing for me. I 3 years ago when I had a second bone marrow transplant, I'm realizing as I'm talking how not repetitive the themes are, but just how consistent we are as human beings, because I went into the hospital with a suitcase not full of books of the Western canon, but full of journals. Because I was like, cool. Yeah. I've got this. I'm going to do another 100-day project. It's fine. I'm going to, write my way through it. And within a couple of days of being admitted to the hospital, I had a complication that impaired my vision for about 2 or 3 weeks. And I couldn't comfortably write. It wasn't useful. It wasn't cathartic. And I was having these really scary medication-induced hallucinations and nightmares. And someone had given me a block of watercolor paper and paints. And I'm not a painter. I haven't painted from the time I was a little kid. But I knew from having been through this before that, to hold to whatever plan you had, when the plan is just not going to happen, as a recipe and just frustration and bitterness. And so I decided to keep a visual journal. And I was painting these nightmares that I was having. And instead of feeling scared of those nightmares, I was intrigued by them. They became interesting to me. And it's that shift, that kind of that sense of alchemy that I think is what I find so miraculous, where you go from feeling a certain way to, through a creative practice, be it journaling or painting or whatever it is that speaks to you, you get to transform an experience or some kind of pain point into something interesting and useful and maybe even beautiful. And so that's how I started painting.
I love that.
By the end of that 6-week hospital stay, I had covered the walls of my hospital room in these watercolors, and my nurses would come in each morning excited to see what new thing had been put up on the wall, and they described it as this like weird hospital art gallery. And the woman who would come and clean the floors said she would always clean them for longer than she needed to, because she just felt good being in there. And so, yeah, again, that mystery. I never thought at 33 that I would uncover a whole new creative passion. And now it's all I want to do. It's what makes me feel most alive, and what I look forward to most.
It's painting. So exciting. It's so exciting. I want to talk about, just for a moment, because around journaling specifically, I love the practicality of this, like the fears and concerns many of us have, especially if you're like, oh, like, well, I don't know how to get going, or I have nothing to say, or this feels really cringy, or, I don't have the energy or the inspiration to write one word. What are some of the fears or concerns that you've heard when teaching this work? And what are a couple of either tools or ways around some of those concerns? So if people feel inspired to obviously get the book, to start their own 100-day practice, but then actually put pen to paper.
Yeah. So I think consistency is the biggest stumbling block. Like I said, a lot of people buy journals because we know it's like meditation or, all kinds of different modalities. It's something that's supposed to be good for us. And maybe you start out strong. Maybe you get stuck before you even start, but it's just hard to keep going. And I think journaling, much like exercising, is not only a muscle that you have to develop, but you really only, in my opinion, reap the benefits of it when you're doing it consistently.
I agree.
And when you kind of right through the fog or right through the resistance, that to me is where the interesting stuff happens. And so I've always been partial to that container, be it 30 days or 10 days or 100 days. And the only way I know how to be consistent is to have some sense of accountability. So I have a friend, Holly, who got a copy of the book, and, she's in a book club. She's a mom with 2 young kids. And she's like, I don't have time to do this. And I was like, go on your phone, please, and look at how many hours you spent on social media this week. And she was like, no, I don't want to do that. And I was like, great. Okay. You do have time.
It's an inconvenient
right?
truth. Yes.
It's just what you prioritize. And also more importantly, what makes you want to come back to it.
Yes.
And so she decided that she could not commit to 100 days. She could only commit to 1 prompt. And I was like, cool. And she brought it to her book club, this gathering of other young moms. And they were like, I don't really want to do this. We have 1 hour a month where we get to be together and to socialize. Why would we spend 15 minutes of our precious hour in silence writing together? But they did it. And, I think, it's so hard to find, to quote the poet T.S. Eliot, like the still point in a spinning world. And to me, there's something actually really special about journaling with someone else, about finding that still point together. So much of our social interactions are around like eating and drinking and talking, and to just get to be with other people where you're not doing any of that is so rare and so sacred. And so that's what they did. They read an essay and prompt. They wrote together for 10 minutes. They were not going to read their journal entries because it's not meant to be read, but they talked about what came up for them. And she told me later, she was like, we've known each other for years and we learned things about each other that we never knew. And so for me, like I do my version of that with different people. I have my own kind of little journaling club where we gather and write together. And that's the thing, I think, that kind of thing, whether you're using an accountability tracker or some kind of buddy system or some kind of book club, journaling club, that to me has always been necessary to keep the practice going, especially when you don't feel you have it in you. The other thing I'll say is folding it into a non-negotiable part of your routine for me is the only way I can ensure that I do it.
Yes.
So a non-negotiable part of my routine is my first cup of coffee in the morning.
Amen.
Right?
Yes.
Like nothing is going to happen until that happens.
Yes.
And so that's when I do my journaling.
Isn't it so sacred? Like I love the mornings so much. They are such magic time. There's been times when I go to bed specifically excited to wake up and have coffee. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm
That's
already
me every single night. I'm like,
that's exactly. I'm like, oh my God. And I like put my little journal out, and sometimes I have my candle, and other times I have like my special mug, and it's just, it is legitimately the best. I love that. And I think the other thing you wrote about in the book, which I loved, was that if any part of you is afraid of someone reading it, it's like you can lock it up. You can also write and like burn it or get rid of it, just to give yourself that total sense of safety and that sense of privacy that all of us need, especially when exploring our lives and ourselves and all of our stuff. I want to talk about something you wrote not so long ago, and I loved this. You said, 2 things giving me joy right now are my dogs and my design projects. And you referenced moving to this 1800s farm in the Delaware Valley. So I am obsessed. Anyone who knows me knows like real estate porn is my favorite porn. Like Street Easy and me, I will tell brokers here in Manhattan about list. They're like, wait, are you a broker? I'm like, nope, I'm just obsessed. Like
totally.
And by the way, I found a new really fun piece of candy on Netflix. Have you discovered The Parisian Agency? Have you seen this?
I'm scared. Is this going to take over my life?
No, it's so delicious. I don't know if you're into reading subtitles, but this has been so delish for me. And I've just introduced it. Like Chris is the only other one I've told about it besides Josh. And it's just basically this real estate family in France. And like, they're not from luxury real estate, but they kind of developed this whole firm. And I'm just sitting there like looking at, and all I want to do is just enjoy it and bathe in it. Anyway, back to you. Can we talk about a little bit about what ignited the move to the farm? Anything that you want to share, like Lentil and Sunshine? And are there other doggies? There's River. Okay. Like, tell me, because decor, interior design, like all the things, that's like my other love. I have many loves.
I have 2 pornographic addictions, so to speak. Real estate and Pet Finder.
Oh,
like
amazing.
Zillow and Pet Finder. Actually, sorry, I have a third, Facebook Marketplace.
Yes. I just started getting the Facebook Marketplace.
Yeah.
Okay. So you might have to teach me your ways.
But I will teach you all of the secrets. So I grew up moving around a lot. I went to 12 different schools on 3 different continents by the time I was 10. And all I dreamed about was having one key and one home. And I've been obsessed not just with the idea of having a home, but what my home would look like from the time I was very, very young. I've been going through all of my old journals, and a lot of my journals, even at age 8, are descriptions of what my future home will look like, because that was my way of trying on a version of a life.
Yes.
And in my earliest journals, I talk about having a farm with multiple dogs and miniature donkeys, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I've also always loved design. I think, like you, I love beauty, and I've come to believe that, beauty, even though it seems like a luxury, is so essential to how we find joy. I feel like my mom is one of my great teachers in beauty. She is the person who will like cut a little flower from her garden and put it in a tiny little bud vase on my bedroom table every single time I come home. It's just like a tiny gesture. It doesn't cost her anything. But it's that little act of curation and love. And so I've inherited, I think, that love from her. And design for me is right now where my passion is. I have furnished probably over 70% of our house from Facebook Marketplace and thrift stores and flea markets. And I just love the act of scavenging for something and finding some unexpected treasure.
Yes.
And in a way, I think, that's what we're all doing in various aspects of our life is excavating and seeking out the treasures, especially in the unexpected places. So yeah, dogs.
The farmhouse,
design,
though,
farmhouse.
Were you all looking again? Because I, for certain friends, like I'm sliding over listings like nobody's business. Like once I know about a friend having either a dream or a desire, or they're like, hey, I'm ready to move, I'm like, put me on the case. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm going to slide. Were you on, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Looking at the listings for a while and basically knew the area you wanted to go and were just clocking it?
Marie, I have been looking at listings since I was 20 years old, like not just years, but like over a decade before it was even a financial possibility.
Yes. Was it in one area, or did you have multiple? Like we're here in New York City right now where our studio is, but I have been looking, I have one little radius, I call it the Shire.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I will not, and everybody thinks I'm nuts. I'm like, I'm not nuts. I'm just specific. My soul knows exactly where it wants to be, and I'm uncompromising and unwilling in that. I'm like, I can be as patient. So that's why I'm asking these questions, because I'm curious who has neuroses like me.
I thought I knew where I wanted it to be, and I was utterly surprised by where we landed.
That's cool.
I ended up, so I was a dancer when I was younger, and I ended up coming across a listing of an old bank barn that had belonged to a contemporary dancer who I admired tremendously. And the only thing I love more than an old house is an old house with like good creative juju.
Yes.
And so we went and visited this place probably 5 or 6 times. And John was like, this is so impractical. No. And I was like, no, just like, bear with me. Here's the vision.
Yes.
I was like, we've been looking for a place, close enough to the city that we can go back and forth, but also far enough to feel transported. I think, like a lot of people, we learned during the pandemic that we're more country mice in some ways than we are city mice. And so I was like, we need a place where we can gather, where we can have creative collaborators. And you know, little by little, we got there. And so that's where we've been. And we have fallen in love with this house, fallen in love with that good creative juju. What John wasn't aware of was that by creative collaborators, I meant not just humans, but many, many animals.
Yes.
So we've adopted 3 dogs. Our latest is a tiny, hairless senior, toothless, hairless senior named Lentil, who we are absolutely obsessed with.
I love Lentil.
And over the weekend, John said to me, I think we need more animals. He's like, it's cow time, it's goat time, yes! It's sheep time. So that is.
Have you gone down the llama route?
No.
So we have a place in upstate New York, and there is a farm, like there's a sanctuary essentially. And I was like hanging out with the llamas, and I'm like, like they're just magical. So I am here for all the animals. This is a cosign. Yes, 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 yes. Celebration. Send food. I will do whatever because this sounds magical.
It. Okay, we need to look into llamas.
Yes.
This is thrilling. Yeah, this is
so he's like, we need more animals. Yeah.
My new day in the life of my dream involves farm animals of all varieties.
That's so cool. That's so cool. So, okay, so that's awesome. So you were like me, you look for a really long time. And then are you the person too, like when I walk into any kind of space, it's emotional for me. Like I'm like, they're like, this checks all your boxes. I'm like, not the soul one. Like you can't check off a vibe. You can't check off that creative juju or the feeling that you have like in a space. Is that true for you as well?
Absolutely. I have to be able to not just picture myself living there, but picture myself writing my next book there and having a whole range of experiences. Whereas my husband's much more practical. He's like, what are the crime rates in this neighborhood? Who are the neighbors?
Yes.
What are, X, Y, and Z. But for me, it's all vibe. And, I think for both of us, we both work from home.
Yeah.
And as people who spend a lot of time on the road, creating a home that not only feels beautiful, but feels like nappable and comfortable, and creatively inspiring is so important to us. And so, we're always trying to figure out, and I think it's why I love Facebook Marketplace and flea markets. I like the places where you can find things that have soul, that have stories.
Yes. I love going upstate and doing some antiquing and just going to some of these places. And then especially too, it's like really great because the contrast sometimes, like I've been in New York, like over 30 years now, and it's still eye-popping prices for certain things. And then you go to different parts and you're like, oh my goodness, and someone doesn't want this anymore. And I think that this is amazing. And it's $10. I'm like, I'm doing cartwheels.
Totally.
Yes.
That's me all the time. And I think it like stems from some childhood scrappy instinct.
100%.
Where I'm like, I want that sofa. I'll look it up. It is wildly unaffordable. Then I go on Facebook Marketplace and inevitably with enough patience and enough scavenging, I find it.
Yes. I can't wait for you to teach me your ways.
All the better because you've had to scavenge for it.
Yeah, 100%. So you've built this beautiful creative life as continuing to navigate uncertainty and love and recovery and reinvention. Are there boundaries or habits that are non-negotiable for you now that help you protect your peace? And I'll put this other context in there too, especially in a world where, again, you and I think share that DNA of like the impetus to create, the impetus to have output and production, which is awesome and beautiful and lovely in all the right ways. But I know, at least speaking for myself, there's also the very real needs of my body to want to rest and the very real needs of my soul that wants space. So I'm just curious if there's anything that's working for you right now.
So, one thing I've noticed with every time I've gotten sick and every time all of my plans have imploded as a result of those relapses is that they've also been my periods of greatest creative growth. And in thinking more about why that is, it's because I don't have a plan. because there is no expectation. There is no outcome that I'm measuring myself up against. I'm just doing the things that bring me joy, that nourish me. And I'm not overthinking it. I'm not trying to be good or bad at it. I'm just doing it because I want to. And I think about that a lot, and how much we resist our own intuition because it doesn't fit in our plan, or because, maybe the plan sounded good, but doesn't fully fit, but you're going to go forward with it anyway, because you've sunken in enough time and energy and resources that the idea of a pivot feels inconceivable. And so I actually actively try to schedule unscheduled time for myself where I can do whatever I want. Yeah. And sometimes that looks like a nap, and sometimes it looks like painting, and sometimes it looks like hanging out with a friend. But when I do that consistently enough, it always leads to the best ideas, which is to say the ideas that are most aligned with my intuition. And so this summer, I am planning to take a whole month off, which I have never done before. I've only done it when it's in response to crisis, when I've gotten sick or something has forced me to take a pause. And I'm going to take the month of August to do nothing, to do whatever it is. I feel like it is a tremendous privilege to get to do that. But it's something that I know, even though it seems unproductive, is the most productive thing that I can do. And I've learned that lesson again and again. And yet it's so hard to believe that and to trust it, even when the work doesn't look like work, even when the work looks like, dancing around in your underwear, or spending all day on your couch.
Yes, I'm with you. I've been talking about a little on the show of just like, I'm planning this. I've never done 3 weeks in Italy. And I'm so excited about this trip. And I'm like, how the hell did I get to this age? And what kind of toxicity is in this programming? Do you know what I mean? That I've absorbed. That's like, wow, 3 weeks in Italy. And meanwhile, I was at my stepson's best friend's engagement party. And so the fact that I have like a 30-year-old stepson also just like, I'm like, well, how does all this happen? Anyway, his best friend, he and his fiance, they're taking 9 months to travel.
Wow.
And I was just like, yes, like it brought me so much inspiration and joy. These two young humans, they are such lovely souls. They're so loving. They're so creative. And both of their careers at the same time. One of them was laid off. The other one, kind of a similar situation. They're like, when do we get to do this? And it gave me so much joy. And it helped me start to thaw some of my own ideas. Do you know what I mean? You're like, I'm taking a whole month off, and it's like, I'm in here doing cartwheels for you and full on high kicks and pom-pom throws. I love that. And it's like a lesson that for me, I keep learning and unlearning and learning and unlearning. And it feels like a really exciting new phase of life to not push. I just grew up with the pushing. It's only going to happen if I make it happen. And like recently, so many things have been happening that I am not making happen. Yeah. So it feels like I'm like, oh, it's a whole new world. I should not be singing because I'm terrible, but you get it.
I love it. I mean, we talked about eulogy virtues. Like in the moments when I've gotten scary medical news, like I think about the things that I'm so grateful I did. And it's never, working through the entire weekend or whatever it is, or turning down the amazing trip with my best friends that I said no to because I was on deadline or whatever. Like I'm never like, yes, so glad I did that. Right. It's taking the trip with my best friends and knowing that the work will get done. Yes. And that, and so I think about that all the time. I'm like, and again, maybe it sounds depressing, but to me, it's really useful. I'm like, I
don't think it sounds depressing at all. I think it's super inspiring.
I think it's a helpful thought exercise. Like if you were to get a terminal diagnosis, what would be important to you? And it's a question I ask myself, and I have a terminal diagnosis, but I need to I need to prompt myself in that way to reroute my priorities to what really matters, because that programming is so deep.
It's so deep.
That without actually asking myself that sort of a dramatic question,
yes,
I'm just go, worker bee. And I don't lift my head up, and I feel like I don't have that permission to actually stop and say no to whatever the opportunity is, or to slow down, or to hit the pause button altogether.
Chris, we were talking off camera before we started recording. Chris Carr, who's, my best friend, we talk about this a lot. And like, she lost her dad a few years back, and Ken, love you, Ken. One of his lessons that she wrote about in her most recent book was just like the golden years are for shit. It was such a great saying from Ken. And so Chris and I talk about it. We're just like, dude, anytime we see ourselves or notice ourselves or feel ourselves, again, slipping back into those same old patterns, like I'm always pulling the Ken card and really, really going like, hey, dude, clock's ticking, you know, and I like to talk about it all the time also because my partner is also quite a bit older than I, so it's just like, got to get my shit together. And it's inspiring. It is inspiring because I think we live in such a culture, especially here in the US, where it's very easy to get caught back in the slipstream.
Totally. Totally. We're obsessed with productivity. I mentioned earlier talking to my doctor about I'm like, how do I navigate these what ifs? And the thing he said to me from day one is, you have to live every day as if it's your last. And that's, the kind of advice that people give from the best of places. And I've always found it so panic inducing because I'm like, what does it mean to live every day as if it's my last? Like every interaction has to be meaningful. I have to carpe diem the out of every minute and every day. And that is an exhausting way to live. And I've come to believe that it's terrible advice. And that if we were all to live every day as if it's our last, we'd be, in total chaos. We'd be emptying our bank accounts and declaring bankruptcy, and we'd be, cheating on our spouses and eating ungodly amounts of, who knows what would happen, but it's just not sustainable. And so I've had to shift to this gentler mindset of trying to live every day as if it's my first, and to kind of wake up with a sense of curiosity and wonder that a little kid does naturally. And when I do that, it's not, some race to cross off items on my bucket list. It is, indulging in an hour of bopping around Zillow or hanging out with our newest senior rescue on the couch, or giving myself permission to do nothing at all.
This book and your work and you, most importantly, are a gift to so many. As it relates to the Book of Alchemy, what do you hope it awakens in the heart of the reader?
So, I think a lot of people think that they're not creative. And if your day job doesn't involve, art or music or writing, that it's something that you don't have access to or that you wouldn't necessarily benefit from. And so my hope is that this book helps people realize that creativity is a gift that we all have access to and that we can all benefit from. And that this practice that's shared in the book helps people find their way to a richer, more meaningful, more wonder-filled creative life.
You are such a joy.
Oh,
thank you so much. I am so excited for this. I'm so excited for the tour. I'm so excited for all the things that you will continue to share and enjoy and be. So thank you, Suleika.
Thank you, Marie. Here's to not having, what did you say, societally approved?
Yes.
One sentence descriptors of what we do. And let's go antiquing together, please.
Please.
Thank you.
Hey, if you loved this video, you need to watch this one next. Trust me on that.